Oh, my word, friends. Welcome to another RobCast. I have with me my longtime beloved friend / brother, Kent Dobson. Welcome, Kent.
Thanks.
Kent is in the back house, and Kent lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I've known you since high school. So let me give you a little background on this interview, because this one, we're going to go all over the place. Kent and I worked together. Kristen and I and some friends started a church in Michigan in our late 20s. We were 28. And Kent and his wife, Mandy, had just moved to Grand Rapids, and Kent did the music. So we worked together for a number of years.
Yeah.
And we had all sorts of great times.
Yeah.
And then Kent and Mandy moved to Jerusalem. This would have been 2003.
No. Yeah, 2000. No, before that, 2002.
Okay.
Something
2002,
like that.
2003, Kent and Mandy moved to Jerusalem. And that was because what had happened is we were in this church, but we started on... For me, it was like I realized that Jesus was Jewish.
Yeah, we started reading.
we started reading and studying. So those of you who listen to the RobCast, and you're like, what is this teshuvah word, and shalom, and the historical context of the Bible, and where do you get all this stuff from? What happened is Kent and I were working together, and we started reading the rabbis. We started waking up to the fact that the Jesus tradition rests on the shoulders of a much older Jewish tradition.
Yeah.
And there's this endless pile of awesome gold.
Yeah.
With the mystics and the rabbis and the teachers and the history and archaeology. And so some of you have said, like, well, I don't understand where you get this stuff from the Bible. It all started around 2000, 2001 with my friend Kent and I. I've learned more from him than almost anybody in terms of the two of us learning and passing books back and forth and all that. And Kent has even put out a Bible that's like a study Bible that has like all these notes on where this stuff came from and ancient commentary and all that. So we'll get to that in a minute. But a lot of it sort of went to a whole nother level when we were working together. And I remember you saying, I think I should move to Jerusalem so that I can understand better where the Bible came from, where this tradition came from. And so you moved.
Yeah.
I never forget that. I remember we sent you out, like, go, learn, do stuff.
Yeah, and I'd only been there one other time.
Yes.
On a tour.
Yes.
On a bus, traveling around, seeing things.
So you move there, and I remember, if you can tell what kind of degree did you get?
Well, I have a degree in historical geography. So it's a specific discipline of biblical studies, that's all. And then when I finished that degree, I went on and took some comparative religion courses at another university there, working toward another degree.
Let's start with the story with the rabbi who assigned you Genesis 22. Let's start there, because people will... I think that's where we need to start.
Oh, man. First of all, I was starting to fall in love with Judaism. It was like this whole other world. Wait a minute. There's another religion besides Christianity, and they have most of the same books that we have. So I was just, I don't know. I was starting to fall in love with this other thing. And so my first class in Rabbinic Judaism, I was really excited about. The rabbi comes in, he's got his little kippah on, he's got his little tzitzit, those little tassels that hang down, and he's got his Torah with him. And almost first couple of classes, we start to take a deep dive into the text, and at one point he sends us home to work on the Isaac passage. This is the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, as it's called in Hebrew.
Genesis chapter 22.
Yeah.
Abraham is told, offer your son, your only son.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm already starting to get the feel that Judaism questions are important. And he says to us, go home and come up with as many questions as you can and come back to class. That was the assignment, so I went home. And I was excited about it, writing them down. 4 or 5, 6 maybe. Maybe not even that many. The class, and they're roughly the class began to share when we got back together. Here are the questions that we came up with, and
it's like literally you have 5 or 6 questions.
Yeah, 5 or 6
You read
questions.
the chapter in the Bible, and the assignment is come up with as many questions as you can about the story.
Yes, and some of them are technical. You know, they're technical questions about a specific Hebrew word. Some of them are a little more general, and we get done. And I think we've leveled this guy. You know, I've never been invited in my life until that moment to ask questions about the Bible by a religious person, by someone who loved the Bible. Go home and make and listen to your own questions. And when we were done, it was silent for a moment, and he just said, "That's it? That's it? But these are the only questions you have about this story. You are extremely lucky if these are your only questions about the story." And he went on to say, you shouldn't just be asking technical questions about the story. You should be asking, why is God doing this? Do you want to believe in a God that tells a father to go kill his son? How come none of you are upset by this major problem? How can God ask someone to take the life of his own child? You're so lucky that this does not disturb you. And for something in me broke open. And it wasn't just that it was okay to ask questions about the Bible. I needed that. I needed that so badly in my life. But it's okay to ask, to question God, to say, no, this does not make sense. I refuse to accept this. I do not want to believe in this kind of God, or to even speak directly to God. This is unfair. If this is the kind of God you are, you're not worth following.
Yeah, I'm
and
out.
Listening. I'm out. And he was, and what I learned over time is that in Judaism, that's sacred ground. You're on sacred ground at that moment. Someone who is willing to take their heart out of their chest like that. That takes real courage. Instead of the party line, which is just believe it. God said it, just believe it. That settles it. We're just supposed to accept it. Yeah, of course. If God were to come to me, yeah, sacrifice your son, no problem. I'll get some wood together. You know, I'm sure it's going to be a test. You know,
The sacred holy ground is not, I would do anything, I would take a stand, I would be courageous. The sacred holy ground is, no way, I'm out if you're like that.
Yeah, just
That's where you're actually touching.
Yeah, just read the Jonah story. He runs from God.
He runs the other way. No way am I going to Nineveh.
The point is to run. Yes, Jonah should be commended. Good job. But have you ever heard anybody say that Jonah should have run from God? No, they say, no, he shouldn't have run from God. He's supposed to do what God says. Go to Nineveh, preach. No, run.
So what happened to you is all of a sudden the actual normal, we might even say healthy human response to this absurdity, violence, and tragedy, whatever the thing is human within you that is repulsed, offended, wants to run the other way, that's actually the holy divine place.
Yeah.
And
be a human being.
And the being an actual human being and the polished, calm, just keep stating the truths and be whatever, that's actually the deviation.
Yeah. And you can see it in Jesus sometimes, like when a few disciples or one person comes to him and says, "Can I follow you?" And Jesus says, "I guess okay." And then the guy says he has to go bury his father. And he's like, "Let the dead bury their dead." You know, that is such an offensive, that is not a polished, clean Jesus. That's not a polished, clean approach to spirituality, God, or life. That's something that's very raw and honest and provocative and makes you really wonder, do I really want to be a part of this? And I think stories like Abraham, Isaac, you should be asking, do I really want to be a part of this? What is this? Who is this God? What? That doesn't make any sense.
So I remember we would email, and so I remember us interacting while you were there, and you saying things like, I think I came to try and get to the source, but the source is like really jacked up. Remember, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You saying like, I thought that if I came and hiked all over the Holy Land and went to all the sites where these biblical stories actually unfolded, that it would somehow connect me with, I'm getting close to the source. But it didn't work that way.
I think two things happened at the same time. One, when you stand there, you realize this is not a fairy tale. When you stand next to the Sea of Galilee, which is just a lake, a big lake, you realize
It's like a lake with an ego.
Yeah,
They call it the sea.
the sea, yeah. By the way, yam in Hebrew just means body of water, so it doesn't really have that kind of grandiose thing.
Body of water of Galilee.
But yeah, just come on my tour. I'll take you to a body of water. Yeah, and in Jerusalem, you realize, okay, the geography itself speaks, the landscape, the desert, the rocks, the trees, the olive groves. You realize, okay, it's not a fairy tale. Something real happened here. But at the same time, all of the textual layers and the archaeology and the scholarship and the historical critical scholarship and all this stuff, you realize that the way you've come to understand the story, it's all unraveling. It's all unraveling. There's no way to go to Israel, if you're very honest and you do a deep dive and come away and say, everything I thought going in, I just was confirmed. Praise God. It's what I always thought. No, that's
Wow.
That's a facade. Now, people sometimes go to Israel and they come back with that, but that's because the tour companies are very smart and they give them this very tight, needy, prepackaged, neat kind of thing.
I went on one of those years ago.
Yeah.
Which was get off the bus here. Wow, this is where the Sermon on the Mount is. Aren't the acoustics amazing? Yeah. You don't need a microphone. You can talk to thousands of people. Wow, here's a sandwich. Back on the bus.
Yeah, and there's not even a deep dive into that story, because look at the Sermon on the Mount. It says he turns to his disciples and says, so he's apparently not speaking to thousands of people anyway on the grand Sermon on the Mount. But there's none of that. It's just this surface kind of...
So what would be an example of something that began to unravel based on... Are there stories that leaped out to you that you were at the site and it just didn't fit how it was supposed to before you were there?
Yeah, some of the literalism started to unravel. I remember standing on the Mount of Olives one time with some friends. We were in class. There was kind of a lull in class. And my friend Keith says, just kind of quietly, he's like, hey, man, do you think the ascension was literal? And we kind of look over at the mountain, and there are like churches, and there's like a grave cemetery. And
this is the book of Luke, like Jesus then just sort of lifted up into space.
And you could picture it, like I guess he had a jetpack on and lifted up through the clouds. And we busted out laughing. And we felt guilty for sort of laughing. But we realized this whole place has so messed with our sense of what we think or thought faith was, that just going around and saying my faith is really believing that a man shot up through the clouds right here, and if I just hang on to that literal belief after seeing the Mount of Olives, I'm going to be a person of faith. We realize we can't do that. There must be something else going on in the story than it's just about accepting the facts as they are written here in English and interpreted by my pastor.
So where did that take you?
Well, my first quest took me to historical Jesus studies, which is looking at the Gospels from a critical point of view and saying what's reliable, what's not reliable. Is there some editorial insertion here? This is all real technical. Yeah. Really stuff that's out of my league. I mean,
did Jesus say this, or is this the community 50 really years later remembering in a particular way because it was meaningful to them?
Yeah. What that brought me to over time, and took a very long time, was a completely different understanding of what is this thing that we hold in our hands called the Bible. It's not a book in the classic sense. It's a collection of books, and inside those individual books are collections of stories. And inside those collections of stories are sometimes insertions and some editorial massaging, and sometimes theological agendas. You might have a writer that wants to get a point across, and that's not bad. I mean, everybody has a theological agenda. Every pastor that's ever given a sermon, even if they say, I'm just saying what God said, has some kind of theological agenda, and that's okay. So the gospel writers. And you begin to discover these. And for me, it took me a long time, but I had to kind of break up with the Bible for a while. Like, let's just take a time out. We're not dating right now. I don't know what we're doing, but we'll see each other occasionally. But I don't know what we're in, but it took me a long time to sort of fall back in love with it. And it's convoluted messiness that sort of brought me back in. It's like, oh yeah, this is actually amazing. It's amazing that this group of people over many, many, many centuries who didn't know one another collected up these stories. And they didn't make it a nice, clean, neat, tidy package. I mean, apparently, I didn't go to seminary. You did. Maybe did you take a systematic theology class?
Sure.
I mean, that word is like an oxymoron if you just look at the Bible. There's nothing systematic about it. There are theological patterns. I agree with that 100%. There are great theological themes and patterns that run throughout many of the books. But it's not this carefully laid out, It's just like life is messy. The Bible is messy, and that is what makes it so freaking interesting. And the stories, especially the ancient ones, Old Testament stories, like the one we're talking about, like Abraham, this binding of Isaac thing, there's something so powerful and provocative about its sort of archetypal nature. A man and his son and the future and an unknown country and a lineage and a God that he doesn't even know the God's name really, and he's too old, and I mean that is like the real stuff. And to be less concerned about is everything in here literal. I'll tell you something that helped me. My archaeology professor, Gabi Barkai, very well-known, famous archaeologist.
I've heard of him.
Yeah, you can find his stuff in the Israel Museum. He's found some amazing stuff. I took him I had 3 courses in archaeology with him. Occasionally a student would say, but did this really happen? He's like, I don't know, I wasn't there. I mean, I don't know if it happened or not. And then he would sometimes say, the Bible's like a cake, and it has all kinds of ingredients in it. It has some story, has some poetry, it has some myth, it has some history, has some legend. It has some technical mistakes, like maybe a letter is messed up here or there. But what makes the Bible interesting is that you don't know how much of each ingredient is in each story. And that's why you dive in. You say, I don't know what the ingredients are here. I don't know how much actually happened. I don't know how much is story. I don't know how much is poetry. For some reason, I needed that so badly just to calm down. All right, calm down. Just calm down. I mean, I don't know what it was like for you, but for me growing up, the Bible and God were virtually the same thing. I mean, for so many evangelicals, it's like the thing we're worshiping is the text. We're not even worshiping the God to which the text points. We're saying it's located here. God has to be in these words exactly as I'm forcing them to be. I need it to be 6 literal days. Right. And that is my God. And that's why you get, I think, so much venom around just defending the Bible as if they're defending God. But God apparently didn't have a problem with this sort of crazy, convoluted book. And most of the characters in the Bible didn't have the Bible. Abraham wasn't like, well, I guess I got to consult the Word of God before I, get going on my journey. Or, even Jesus, he didn't walk around with like a personal copy of Isaiah in his back pocket.
Your village may have had a copy in a closet in the town synagogue.
And I would say maybe.
Maybe.
And in Old Testament times, nobody had it. It was in the realm of the elites, the priesthood and the political and religious establishment. They were the only ones that had the any kind of sacred, document. And apparently they were fine. They weren't like, man, if we only just could carry the word to class, or out in the field with me.
If only some guy named Gideon wouldn't put these in hotels, we could really get something done around here.
Seriously.
So when did you? I remember then you started doing tours where you would hike all over Sinai, Israel. Like you would take people and just take them up a mountain.
I got really lucky. I got tied into a group out of Michigan when I was a student there, and I led many, many tours while I lived there, and then I've continued on. I've been doing it for like 10 or 12 years. It's the way that I learn. Maybe not everybody learns the way that I learn, but I just love the tactile nature of listening to these stories unfold before your eyes roughly in the settings where these took place. And it's the whole walking, learning, talking, asking questions, essentially what Jesus was sort of up to as he wandered around. To me, that is just money. That is money. That's the way to see a place, any place. Italy, Jerusalem, LA. Walk around, you talk, you see things, you ask questions. And Israel, by the way, is such a crazy, ridiculous, weirdo kind of place. It's not just like a bunch of old stones.
Like, what's an example of the weirdo nature of it?
I mean, I have seen grown Russian Orthodox men, priests in the Holy Sepulchre, pushing old Romanian women onto the ground because they're cutting in line. This kind of just like, wait, is this happening right now in church? People complain about the music in church. Yeah, but this guy just shoved an old woman onto the ground. So that kind of weird stuff, and all of the politics and checkpoints. And I want to go to Bethlehem to get chicken, but I got to go through this. Checkpoint. And there's like a band playing, in downtown Jerusalem.
So Bethlehem.
Yeah.
Little town of Bethlehem, Jesus, presents, Black Friday, all that. If you were to take us to Bethlehem, all the RobCast listeners, only a small enough group that we can actually go there. How long would you take us to Bethlehem for? What would you show us?
I'd take you for like a half a day, probably.
A half a day.
First thing I would do is take you to a place called the Herodian. It was Herod's palace in Bethlehem. So here's a little piece of history. There, in the story, Herod the Great is a character in the birth narratives. And he has a palace in Bethlehem, right outside where the old city was. He built a mountain. It's like this Gallus, like a volcano it looks like. He gathered up all the surrounding hillsides and built this really fortress more than palace. It's where he was buried. They found his tomb a few years ago.
200 steps, 4 towers, 7 stories.
Yeah, nice. You know more about than I do.
Oh yeah, Google image the Herodian.
Yeah.
You can Google that too.
Yeah.
The pictures will blow you away. It's
really
incredible.
Amazing. So I take you there because it overlooks the desert, and you really get a sense for King David, on which the entire messianic story is built upon. Someday there'll be a king, just like David way back then, and he's from Bethlehem. So you get a sense, and you see why Herod built his palace. He was trying to be like the Messiah. He was trying to be like King David.
Because in the air among this tribe of people was, we once had a great king named David. He was from Bethlehem. Someday there's going to be another King David.
Yeah.
And so if you're Herod and you're ruling this tribe, you go to Bethlehem where David was from, and you build the biggest fortress possible as a way of saying, I'm the new David, which no one bought.
Yeah.
So you'd take us there, you'd show us the Herodian.
Yeah, and there'd be nobody there. And we'd have to go through a couple checkpoints, and there'd be Israeli soldiers with guns. And you could look out on the landscape and see, you can imagine David with the sheep. And you can also see, there's an Israeli settlement. There's an illegal Israeli settlement. There are different categories. And then you'd see, here's an Arab village. Here's a Palestinian village. Here's a Christian church. Here's a minaret. Here's a mosque. And then I'd take you into the city. I'd take you to the Church of the Nativity, the traditional site of Jesus' birth, and I probably wouldn't even go in with you. I'd say, you go check it out yourself and tell me what you think.
Oh, wait, that's where there's that little spot where they say Jesus was born?
Yeah.
And it's like down some stairs or something? Oh, I've seen that.
Yeah.
And you're like, there's no way. No.
There's
no way he was born here. Whatever that is.
And you can actually stick your hand in this like hole where apparently Jesus, I mean, it's a little creepy and it's freaky. But it's also a sacred site for many, 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 many thousands of people. You realize, I think, traveling around Israel and seeing other tourists that, American Protestant Christians are a tiny fraction of the global Christian community. And for a lot of people, taking a pilgrimage to Israel is a culmination of a lifetime of desires, not to see the historical Jesus, but to see those sites, to see the churches. So you get a sense that whatever Christianity is, I'm in one tiny corner of it, and I have a lot to learn.
And it's in a corner of a bunch of other religions and worldviews.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so you go all over. You get to the point where you can take people anywhere and show them rainfall, topography, like
Yeah.
politics, history, archaeology. You come back to the States, and my observation would be, at some point I notice as your friend that it's not about just figuring out another nice, interesting, cool insight about the Bible, but it becomes about what it means to be human and about the interior journey.
Yeah.
And what brought that about?
I don't know. I think I had spiritual PTSD when I got back from Israel. I was like shaken, and it wasn't the academic stuff. It was just life there. Life was insane, and this was a time period when there were suicide bombings.
Wasn't a place near where you lived
Yeah,
bombed?
yeah. There was a cafe down the street. I felt it while I was typing at my computer, working on a paper.
Had you been to that cafe a bunch?
Oh yeah, yep. been
How
to that
far
cafe.
from your house?
Block. Yeah.
A block.
Yeah. See, I
And
could feel it in my chest. When it went off.
The bomb went off, you could feel it in your chest.
Yeah. Shook
Did you
the whole
know
house.
it was a bomb when you
Yes,
felt it?
yes, because this was a time period when they were happening regularly, and thankfully that kind of stuff's not taking place currently. But it was a very chilling and also numbing experience. You're like, what am I doing? So
I remember the first email you sent after that.
yeah,
I remember you describing what that was like to walk down the street a block and to see that sort of devastation.
yeah. So when I returned to the States, I took a job as a high school teacher, and that was really good for me. I just needed something to do. But yes, eventually I started to realize, I think that's a nice way of putting it, that the stories in the Bible are larger patterns,
Yeah.
are patterns for the interior and real spiritual adventure that I was longing for. And I couldn't just keep going out there. Like if I went to Galilee again and got on a boat again, just like Jesus did, and went to and I love doing that. But I wasn't going to find it over there. That the stories were about they were maps for the spiritual journey, and I had to start paying attention to my own life, not just looking for it over there. Like if I could only get all the right interpretations right in the Bible, then I'd find God sort of at the end of the rainbow. I had to start paying attention to what was going on inside, and that was really hard to look at the time because I was so rocked by it, by Jerusalem, and intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, and that's actually what I also needed. I needed to be leveled. I needed to be knocked over. So I think for so many people, they think if I just go, if I do it right, really get serious, really study, really read all the right books, buy all of your Rob Bell books, then I would reach this place. But what happened to me is that, I don't know, little threads just kept coming out. And it turns out the very stories in the Bible say that's what happens. You set out and there's a death and resurrection. That is the major pattern. It's a death and resurrection.
Yes.
Something has to die. So my old way of looking at the Bible, my old way of looking at God, my old way of looking at Jesus, my old way of looking at church, my old way of looking at spirituality had to die. And it didn't die, thankfully, in a day. It was slow, very slow, painful death. But I had to go all the way down. And I'm still there. Some things are still, the glue is still dissolving for me. But on the upswing, something else is being born. And yeah, I did start to think about. I call my Israel trips, by the way, pilgrimages. So which I think is a great word. It's one of the 7 ancient disciplines inside Christianity, ancient Christianity, to take a pilgrimage. But the point of taking a pilgrimage is that the exterior journey mirrors the interior journey.
Yes. And this is very, very helpful for me because I'll often maybe I might be doing a Q&A, and there's somebody who has a question about, let's say, a Bible passage or a spiritual idea. And I pick up, like my spirit picks up a certain anxiety or something unresolved in the question, that it's not the question they have, it's the spirit animating the question, which I realize now is, if I could just get this sorted, then.
Yeah. There's always something else, though.
Right. And so you essentially are like, hey, Bible boy, or whoever you went over there, lived there, became an expert guide, went to the very heart of the thing.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, you can get every single Bible passage or spiritual idea or enlightenment theory. You can go all the way into the heart of it. But if you're going into it as an external thing, if I just get this system, this thought, this answer, but those are all patterns of that which has to take place inside you.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And that will always involve the thing that isn't working has to die.
Yeah.
The thing that isn't bringing you life, that's no longer... Because I meet people all the time who are like, I grew up with this thing, I was handed this thing, I was educated in this thing, and now it doesn't work. Is there some like hack? It's like, no, you're pretty much going to have to die to all the stuff that's not working.
Yeah.
And until you die to it, you aren't going to be able to be born into the next thing.
Yeah. And see, I think a lot of religious teachers, voices, books, pastors, and they do it. I mean, a lot of times they do it in good faith. They just want to keep patching together something. So the moment they hear this person has a question about X, we need to quickly patch that up. We need to say,
give
no,
an
no,
answer
no.
to X.
Yeah, we've got an answer, and don't hang out there too long, because your anxiety is mirroring back to us our own anxiety, which we don't want to face. And that is a sick and unhealthy religious culture. But thankfully, I mean, you don't have to stay there. You can get out. You can get out. You don't have to stay in this kind of...
Right, you can keep going.
Yeah, you don't have to stay in an environment that continually wants to shove it down, to put it in some black bag and not face it.
Yeah, it's interesting on this How to Be Here tour I'm doing now. Every single city, at least several people ask some version of, I've seen something, tasted something, I'm moving forward, I'm seeing it in a new way, and my family, sometimes even spouse, coworkers, church, roommates, whatever, don't see it. And so this person is voicing new expanded views, consciousness, beliefs, etc. And the system that they're in is terrified because if we just let you keep doing that, we have to woo you back in, or we have to expunge you. But we can't have you growing like this in our midst because you're voicing the stuff that is the deepest thing that we don't want to talk about because it's terrifying.
Which is why which is why the hero's journey is so interesting, because the real hero's journey, you leave the village, and you're not victorious. You're actually dismembered. You come apart,
Yes.
But you do return with a gift for the community.
Yep.
But we have, especially inside Christianity, we don't want anybody going out. We don't want anybody going on the journey. And therefore, we don't receive any new gifts from anyone. We just keep saying, don't go anywhere, don't go anywhere, don't go anywhere. There are even, all the statistics about young people leaving the church and millennials not going to the church. I'm like, finally somebody is, go as far as you can.
Go, right.
And when things fall apart, which they will, come back and give us a gift, because we're dying. We're dying over here for some fresh person to wander in from the wilderness and say, I've been out here for 40 days and it was hell, but I have some new insights. Yes. I can see something that I could not see before. But we don't want it. We don't want that. We don't want that.
Every time I meet a parent who's like, my kid is searching, what should I do? I'm always like, join them. How much fun would that be?
Get in line.
Yeah. Do you realize the worst, if your job is to try to keep your kid where you are, the worst possible cell job is to be threatened by your kid's search.
Yeah.
Nothing is less interesting than, I don't know, go with them.
Yeah.
Go search with them. See what happens. Now, what did you... So what happened is you began to realize, wait, this is about the thing happening to me. This is about history, past, all this stuff brewing inside of me. And where did that take you?
Well, thankfully, at the tail end of my time in Israel, when I was at the Hebrew University, I started taking some courses in Christianity. Like, I went there to learn about Judaism, and then I started to get interested in Christianity. So I took a few courses on Eastern Christianity, Eastern mysticism, Desert Fathers, and I realized, oh wait, there are hundreds of voices, I wouldn't say thousands, hundreds of voices that are speaking about the very thing that I have been longing for.
Yep.
It's actually inside my own tradition, but it's been in the caves and back alleys of Christianity and not in the mainstream, not in the Orthodox doctrines and, high church and Rome, and nothing wrong with Rome, but it's been under, like everything, like the Jesus movement, there has been something happening on the fringes.
The whole time.
Yes. And so words like contemplation and mysticism, I read that stuff in graduate school. I read the mystics in graduate school. That is not the same as becoming a mystic. You don't read the cloud of unknowing and then you're enlightened. You read it and you're like, holy crap, I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And so that's what happened to me. I don't know what I'm talking about. And when I got back to Grand Rapids, Manny and I both took a course from the Dominicans on spiritual formation, and we reread these texts. I was reading the same text from Dominican sisters as I had read in graduate school, but I wasn't reading them as an academic. I was reading them as an open-hearted, spiritually thirsty
somebody
human being.
Thirsty, right?
Yes. I was like, oh, there's something here. So it started me down.
How would you explain the mystics to somebody who's like,
easy.
Wait, what do you mean?
Easy. A mystic is someone who has an experience of the divine. That is a mystic. It's not fancy ways of speaking. It's not like clever poetry. It is someone who has an experience of the divine. And one usually that rocks them, turns their life inside out. They shave their head and they sell all their clothes like St. Francis. That something happens that, in their words, is a divine experience. And their language about it is just their way of working it out. So whatever they write, St. Francis didn't write anything, his followers did, but the writings of the mystics are their ways of trying to name their own unique experience of the divine. It's like the prophets. What makes a prophet? It's not someone who predicts the future. It's not someone that God whispers in their ear, like, hey, when you get up in the morning, make sure you write down Isaiah chapter 5, No, they're rocked by an experience. They have a vision. They wake up one day and they see in the heavens a beast, and they're like, my life will never be the same. And they spend the rest of their time, I think, trying to work some of that stuff out. So those are the mystics, and they're worth reading because they are saying, this is my experience of God. This is what it was like. And it just opens up all these kind of internal passages in your own heart that, all right, maybe, and your own longing for divine experience. That's what people want. They want divine experience.
And oftentimes the mystics, and those of you listening might be like, wait, we're talking about me now. You may resonate with this. Those of you listening about the mystics often are on the fringes of the institution.
Often. I can't think of any that
always.
Yeah.
Because the institution needs clarity and definition to function.
Yeah.
And needs a controlled vision of the divine or the good or whatever.
Yeah.
And that the mystic is the one who's had an experience of that which can't be named, and thus, if you can't name it, you can't control it and manipulate it and keep it under wraps. So generally, the most interesting experiences are always around the fringes of the thing.
Yeah. The entire Bible is
obviously happening now, which has obviously been happening for thousands of years.
Yeah, and all of the characters in the Bible that had experiences of God, they were all fringe people. Who was Abraham? Some random dude,
who left.
Yeah,
that's what we know.
Or Jacob, a guy who lies, and and then all of a sudden one day he lays down on a stone and on the earth, and this
is the huge thing right now because of all of the people I meet everywhere who are having these experiences and they don't fit within the party line and they're feeling alone and lonely and isolated, and it's like I don't even know how to amplify it enough. no, you're part of the tradition.
Yeah.
This is the tradition.
Yeah.
The tradition is the loneliness that comes from an experience that doesn't fit within whatever the prevailing decision has been about these kinds of experiences.
Yeah. 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 I'll give you an example. Like, I felt like I did not know who God was. I do not know God's name. I do not know what God is. And somewhere by some, miracle, I came across the Apophatic Tradition, which is a whole tradition inside of Christianity that says we do not know anything about God.
Right.
I was like, wait a minute. I thought I was like the loner, like it was atheism or, a Baptist preacher. Those were the two
Right.
extremes, But I realized, oh no, the mystics were saying, oh yeah, at a certain point you don't know anything about God.
And basically the definition is just what we don't
we don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. No images.
Yes.
Oh, God is our Father. God is not our Father. The Apophatics say, no, He's Father. That's meaningless. There's God. God can't be a father. And you're just like, or even God exists. That's yes, God exists. The Apophatic tradition would say God does not exist. He does not exist in any way that you understand existence. And see, that's what I'm saying. And to embrace that and to say, oh my word, okay, maybe there's something to this.
Absolutely. And that was actually a thriving, vibrant tradition.
Yep. Again, in the back alleys. But,
Right.
But that's why the institution, the popes in Rome weren't stupid. The current pope right now, I mean, he may be a mystic for all we know. He has always been attracted to the edges. He's always been attracted to the mystics as far as what he's been saying. They need one another. It's like the kings needed the prophets and the pastors need the crazy people on the edges,
Yeah.
They need the teenagers who, I don't know.
Right. Poke fun at the whole thing and challenge the whole thing because that's where its lifeblood. That's where the thing is if it can't allow itself to be challenged and critiqued and even mocked, then it's actually really weak, not strong.
That's right.
A sign of its strength is it's flexible and limber and able to be poked and prodded.
Yeah.
So what took you into personal... we were talking recently about the ego and image and...
Yeah. Well, I think what happened to me is I also realized I need some help. I need some help. I don't need just to read another book. So part of the spiritual formation class at the Dominican Center, they encouraged us to get a spiritual director. And this was really the first time in my life. My dad was a pastor, so I had all the answers ready-made, Dad, what does this mean? Or, I grew up in a very certain world. So I'd never been to a therapist, counselor, spiritual director, and just to sit down and say, this is what I'm feeling, this is what's going on. It took me a while to even get used to saying, this is what's going on in my life. This is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm feeling. Is that okay? And that was my I've had 2 spiritual directors. But that opened up, it started to help me gain a little bit of interior language for what is going on. And then that became a whole nother country I had yet to visit. And I started to get interested in things like psychospiritual work and eventually I got a therapist and I started reading, some psychotherapists that I was attracted to. I started doing work with a guy named Bill Plotkin who has the Animas Valley Institute in Colorado, where these are wilderness experiences that are meant to help you in your own psychospiritual growth, meant to help you grow up, to put it simply. So I started doing that kind of work, and just trying to do a deep dive into what is going on. I think one of the things that became evident to me, or at least works for me as a map, I had spent a lot of my time looking up into the heavens. Who is God? What is God? Where is God? What is theology? Who is Jesus? He's got to be out there somewhere. And looking for divine connection and the upward spiritual journey, prayer, but I hadn't done much of a interior, what is the soul? And so that journey, it seems to me, the journey toward God, which tends to look like an upward journey, I don't mean that too literally, and the downward journey into the depths of your own being are absolutely essential. They're two sides of the same coin. You cannot do one without the other. And I had some serious deficiencies. That's been what the last couple of years have been for me, trying to get down to the bottom. What is there? Is there a true self? I started reading Thomas Merton, Wait a minute, true self, false self. What is he even talking about? What is down there?
Will you talk to me about love? Is it love and soul? We were talking ego
and
soul.
Yeah. So ego in spiritual circles, as you probably know, gets a bad rap. It's like, oh, everything is, can't have an ego. You got to get the ego out of the way. And sometimes that's very helpful for people, especially the way ego is used in a contemporary sense. But ego is simply your personality, persona, this part of yourself that gets things done in the world. You wake up in the morning, you're like, you know what, I'm going to write a book today, or I'm going to write one chapter of a book, or I'm going to fly to Los Angeles and I'm going to see Rob. The ego's involved. You wouldn't get out of bed.
Drive, motivation. Gumption.
Yeah, even personality. You go to a party, your ego's involved. You don't have to get it out of the way. It's okay. But the ego doesn't know what's important. The ego doesn't know what's valuable. The ego doesn't know what it should do in life in the grand scheme of things. It just wants to do things. And the problem is most people only hang out in that world. So they think, my ego needs something to do and it's got to be the right thing to do. So it's a perpetual quest for, I got to have this job or this relationship or that relationship, because the ego doesn't know what is ultimately important, but the soul knows. The soul is the image you had before you were born. It is your true self. It is probably some kind of image. It's the place you are meant to inhabit in the world.
What does some kind of image mean?
Well, I just mean it's hard to put into words.
Oh, got it. Okay.
The soul speaks in images. If you read the great mystics, the great poets, they speak in imagery because that's the thing. How are you supposed to describe? I mean, if you were to talk about what's really going on, in your heart or your soul, deep down, what would you say? What would you say about that?
Because if you try to use standard scientific definitive language, it doesn't sound. You end up saying things like, I don't know, it feels like the song's in the wrong key.
Yeah.
Or it feels you end up it's like.
Yeah.
Because you can't get very technical or specific.
I think people can sense when their soul is coming alive when they have that. Sometimes it can feel like a gut instinct, or all of a sudden something wakes up inside and they say, no, I'm not going to do that. Or yes, that's it. That's it. Something wakes up from down in the depths of your own being, and it resonates
something
in
below
your chest.
The chin.
Yes, yeah.
But something in the seat of your being knows, and you might not even have logical, rational, analytic descriptors and language for it, but yet it will even say, I know it more than I know anything.
Yeah.
Just not in the normal way I know things.
Here's an example. Maybe you wouldn't say this is true, but you've told me before that when you came out to LA, or when you were thinking of leaving Grand Rapids and coming out west, you came out and you're like, yep, we're going to move right here. What was that? It wasn't the calculative ego mind saying, well, if I do this and if I get this house and this house, something was like, no, right here, boom.
Right.
We belong here. I'm not saying for all of eternity, but I'm saying I'm going here.
It's like a cellular, atomic knowledge where your whole body is like, yep.
So this is why the ego and the soul have to fall in love, because your soul can ring. You can be like, I have to be by the beach here, or I got to be in this canyon, or I've got to live, I want to be near this place, but the soul can't get it done. So it's in love with the ego, because the ego can do it. The ego can say, don't worry about it, guys. Look, we've got our assets. We can liquidate. We can liquidate and make this baby happen.
Yeah.
And the soul is just enraptured by this. Amazing.
Right.
And the ego for the first time is doing what it's doing, but now it's doing it because it's talking to the soul instead of on its own desperate search for identity.
Just something to grab hold of and grasp.
Yeah, just grasping at things. So
the ego and the soul have to fall in love and work together. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you have all this resonance and truth, but no way to enact any of it. Yeah. Or you have all this action, busyness, worry, stress, anxiety, climbing, achieving, but not in the service of anything greater.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
it's just you're in the corner office making lots of money, but you're bored out of your mind. Your kids, they have perfect teeth and perfect clothes, and you're carpooling them each day, and it's all great, but you have no sense that any of it, it doesn't have some larger thing.
Yeah.
So the two have to come together,
Yeah. I think so.
and now you got something.
Yeah. And it's a dance, just like dating. It takes a while. And I've just been in a season of my life where I'm trying to do as deep of a dive as I can into the soul and into what makes me tick and the
Yeah.
uniqueness of being me. And that's not a selfish thing. So many, especially Christians, they're told that their unique self has got to go. You know?
All right. If you enjoy it, whatever you do, don't do it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the one thing you shouldn't do. You should deprive yourself of that, but that's nonsense. And but it requires a lot of trust. You got.
And for many people, the problem with listening to the soul is so many voices around them have weighed in on their soul.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
that's not legit. We don't do that in this family. You can't have a career in that.
Yeah.
And so for many people, just listening to the soul
Yeah.
takes practice and time and patience and skills and techniques and hours.
Yes. Yeah.
Because to even say, well, what's your soul saying, or what is it, or what's your true self speaking to you, is like learning a new language. I don't know. I have been serving this person and living up to this person's expectations and trying to impress these people for so long.
Listen to Mary Oliver. She says, one day you finally knew what you had to do and you began. One day, she doesn't say what it is. She just says, one day you finally knew what you had to do and you began. Though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice. And that's where most people get stuck. The voices around them keep shouting, don't do it. You can't do it. You're going to get hurt. You're going to hurt us. This is not going to make sense. You're going to ruin your life. You're going to end up living in a van down by the river. Don't do it. But that is just the way it is. When you start to listen and say, one day you finally knew what you had to do and you began. That's what it started. When I left Mars Hill, it started with a poem, honestly, and a lot of other circumstances. But I read that poem every day for a year. I didn't know what it was. One day you finally knew what you had to do and you began. I was starting to begin, and that's as soon as you start down that path, everyone starts shouting, don't do it. And she also says, the voices around you start shouting their bad advice, saying, mend my life. Mend my life, each voice cried. Fix me. Fix me, fix me, fix me. If you go, I'm going to be in serious trouble. Don't do it. This is why we need mystics and poets. There it is. That's 2 lines of one poem. That's someone who has gone on the journey herself.
Yeah.
She didn't say, here's a clever idea I'd like to try out. No, she knew. She did that at one point in her life, or at several
Absolutely.
points.
You can't write that unless you know what that is. Yeah.
Though it was already late in a wild night. She also says that in there. It was already late. And that's what it feels like. I should have done this years ago. It was already late and a wild night. And there were, branches in the road.
Whenever you step forward into greater life and vitality, and there's always a cost, and there's always a discussion you have on the other side, which is, why didn't I do this earlier?
Yeah.
But you weren't you weren't this person earlier.
But slowly, the stars begin to burn through the sheets of clouds, and you start to recognize a voice. You start to hear a voice. You start to hear a voice that you slowly recognize as your own. And that's what people want. They want their own voice, don't they? Yes. I mean, that's what I want.
Absolutely.
And it's a slow recognition. Wait a minute, who is talking right now?
Right.
Who is living like this right now? That's the true self. That's the true self. Come into life. Whew. That's what I want, man.
That's so fantastic. Friends, you have met my beloved friend Kent Dobson. As you can see, he continues to inspire. By the way, for those of you, historical note, when I left the church that we had started in 2011, Kent was the teacher who became the teacher at the church we started in Grand Rapids for the past couple of years. So that's the beautiful sort of way all of this story has woven together. And now Kent and Mandy are moving on to the next thing. but for a few days he's been here in California with us, and this was fantastic.
Thanks, Rob.
I'm so glad. You're more inspiring than ever.
So are you.
Now, people, if they want to see some of your writing, Kent Dobson, where do they go?
Yeah, I mean, I do have a website, kentdobson.com. They can buy the NIV First Century Study Bible if they want to do a little bit of a dive into historical, cultural stuff and rabbinic stuff.
If you're the person who's always like, wait, where do you get all this interesting stuff about the Bible?
Yeah.
Kent did an actual study Bible. What is it again? The NIV?
The NIV First Century Study Bible. And it's actually for the person who asks, where do you get this stuff? Because that's what I got all the time. All right, I'll try to give you at least a little taste of where I get some of this stuff.
So you made a Bible.
Yep. Yep.
Great.
So yeah,
Anything else where people can get a hold of what?
I mean, if they go to my website, they can check out my tours. I'm gonna continue to take people to Israel. I really do love that. I have a book coming out next February if all goes well. If I do all the hard work.
Book coming next year, and if people literally want to go hike in Israel with you, that's possible. All info on your website.
Yep.
There you have it, my friends. Another friend that we all love. Grace and peace, everybody. Thank you, Kent.
Thank you.